Duke and Darian Mensah are in a massive legal battle that could have huge ramifications for all of college sports. Can universities force student athletes to fulfill NIL contracts? Can they keep them out of the transfer portal? This is huge. I'm going to break it down. This is the Let's Run podcast. Everybody, welcome to the show today. Grateful to have you. Check out the Let's Run podcast. Please, while you are here, subscribe to the channel. I am a UNLV fan, but I talk about all things college sports. I am also an attorney here in the great state of Nevada. Nothing I say in this video should be construed as any sort of legal advice, just giving information, context, and background as to this Darian Mensah situation. So let's talk about it. I think it was a week or so ago, we found out the news that starting quarterback for Duke, Darian Mensah, entered or was planning on entering the transfer portal. Almost immediately, Duke came out and posted details of the NIL contract that Darian Mensah signed with the university. This situation is reminiscent a little bit. It kind of reminds you of the Desmond Washington situation with the University of Washington. And, you know, he was planning on entering the transfer portal. There was some talk about which school he would go to, the starting quarterback for the University of Washington. Ultimately, Washington reminded him of the NIL agreement that he signed. And he was convinced to return to the University of Washington despite having other lucrative offers elsewhere. That was kind of the precursor to this situation, the Mensah situation at Duke, where Duke is basically saying, hey, Darian Mensah, you have a contract with us. The terms of that contract include a 2-year agreement, a 2-year, $4 million agreement. I'm not sure if I think it's $4 million each year. So this is actually a lot of money that Duke is promising to Darian Mensah to be their starting quarterback. Mensah previously was at the Tulane University, and he led Duke to an ACC title. Despite the fact that Miami was in the conference, Miami didn't make the ACC title game. Duke actually won the ACC title despite finishing the season at 8-5. And so basically, I'm going to break it down for you as simply as I can. When Darian Mensah, and this is pretty standard, so even your NIL contracts that you see with players around the country, there's language like this because these players are signing contracts. There's language like this in a lot of NIL deals that players sign with schools. And basically the language states that for either usually it's at least a 1-year period all the time. But a lot of players are signing 2-year deals with universities. I haven't heard yet of a 3 or a 4-year deal. I imagine that schools have contemplated trying to get players to sign 3 or 4-year deals. There's a lot of risk for both sides there, whether that be injury, non-performance. I think a 2-year deal is about the max that you're going to see. But the contract states that the school, and it's not really the school, it's more the NIL collectives, school adjacent, and the school too, will pay the player a certain amount of dollars per year. So let's say in this case for Darian Mensah, it's $4 million per year. And in return, the player is not actually promising to be a player for the Duke football team. And we're going to use Mensah as the example here. They're not actually being paid to paid to play. Instead, they are giving the school or the NIL collective, the entity related to paying the player, they're giving them their NIL rights. That means that Duke, for all intents and purposes, are the owners of the name, image, and likeness rights of Darian Mensah. They're the exclusive owners of it. They're the group that can pay Darian Mensah for his NIL, and no other group can pay Darian Mensah based on the terms of the contract for his name, image, and likeness. So what does that mean? That means that, even if Darian Mensah were able to go and play for another school, he could not be compensated at all by that other school for his NIL rights. And this also goes towards your revenue sharing. They cannot pay him even from the revenue sharing system that has been set up. essentially, if Darian Mensah wants to be paid to play college football, there's only one place, at least under the terms of the contract, that he can do that. Now, a lot of schools have chosen not to enforce these clauses, have said if a player wants to enter the transfer portal, we're not going to enforce this 2-year clause. If a player wants to leave after 1 year, they can do that. But Duke is fighting back and saying, no, you signed this agreement. We offered to pay you a lot of money over a 2-year period. And if you're going to leave, you can't, because we own your NIL rights. And it's important to distinguish that Duke is not claiming that they own the right of Darian Mensah to play football. Under NCAA rules and under the House settlement and under all of the agreements that, basically the bandages that are holding the college sports world together, players are not being paid for play. They are simply being paid for their name, their image, their likeness, basically marketing, brand deals. That kind of stuff is technically, even though we all know players are being paid for play, under the legal system that exists right now, and it's not much of a legal system, it's really a wild, wild west, players are simply being compensated for their name, image, and likeness. And so Duke doing this and saying, no, you can't go to Miami. You can't. You sign an agreement with us, the 2-year deal is huge. Now, I want to put up the actual legal documents that have been posted by guys like Pete Thamel. I believe Ross Dellinger has posted a little bit so that we can read the language of the lawsuit. This is language from Duke's lawsuit. And basically, here is what, and this because, there's a very limited amount of time here. School's already started. Mensah, if he wants to play for Miami, if he wants to play at a school besides Duke, he has to get in the transfer portal and get to that school as quickly as possible. Duke asked in their lawsuit for a preliminary injunction. Now, obviously, this is a lawsuit, but there isn't time to go to court. There isn't time to have a full, a lawsuit can take 2 or 3 years often. And essentially what Duke is saying is we can't wait for a full lawsuit for the court to step in. If Darian Mensah leaves us, it is causing irreparable harm to Duke. They can't, it's very late in the portal process. They can't afford to go out and get another quarterback. And if Duke football sucks next year because they don't have Mensah, they're going to suffer irreparable harm. They need action now from the court. So what Duke is asking the court to do is enter something called a preliminary injunction. This is basically, an injunction is basically the court saying, you can't do that until the legal proceedings have worked themselves out. And what that means is, the court has power to stop people from doing things. Now, Mensah and his agents, Duke has asked them to prohibit Mensah from entering the transfer portal prior to a final decision from an arbitrator. Arbitration is basically another it's basically not court. It's supposed to be a cheaper form of court that can get faster decisions. It's kind of like a court mandated arbitration is essentially a court adjacent authority that helps cases get acted on faster and cheaper than actually going through a whole trial with a judge. So Duke has asked the court to prevent him from entering the transfer portal prior to a decision from an arbitrator, from enrolling at another collegiate institution prior to the final decision, from playing football at another institution prior to a final decision, from licensing his name, image, and likeness to another collegiate institution prior to the final decision, and from taking any action that would interfere, diminish, or impair Duke's exclusive rights under his contract prior to the final decision of the arbitrator. They basically are just saying, court, keep Darian Mensah from breaking his contract. Make it so he cannot break his contract and that he basically has to play football at Duke until a decision is made in the arbitration process, which is a court adjacent thing where they would go in, they would have basically a mini trial, and an arbitrator would decide who wins on the merits. Other key parts of the lawsuit include that's kind of the gist of the lawsuit. But Duke is basically saying, hey, we need this done and we need it done now. So they had a hearing on the preliminary injunction earlier today. I think it was earlier today. And in this hearing, Duke essentially won almost everything, not quite everything they asked for, but Duke basically won for most of what they asked for. Most of what, not everything. There's a little bit of nuance to it. I don't want to make it seem as quite cut and dry. But Duke, basically, the court said that for the duration of the order, which is essentially until arbitration can occur, which could be a couple of weeks, could be a couple of months. I'm not exactly sure what the timeline is, but it's a temporary but a very important victory for Duke. Mensah and his agents are not allowed to have Mensah, the quarterback, enroll at another collegiate institution. He's not allowed to go enroll as a student at Miami. He cannot play football for another collegiate institution. He cannot license his NIL to another collegiate institution. He cannot break any of the rights that Duke has under the contract that he signed. Essentially, and also the plaintiffs, so in this case Duke, have to post a security of $1,000. It looks like $1,000 or $10,000 or $1 million in cash. And essentially Duke won. And the one part that Duke did not win on is they still technically have to permit Mensah to be able to enter the transfer portal. So the school that you're enrolled at is the entity that puts your name in the transfer portal. Players themselves do not put their own names in the transfer portal. Therefore, a player is kind of at the whim of their school if they want to enter the transfer portal. If I was a player for UNLV, I would have to message the UNLV football program, say, hey, I want my name in the transfer portal. And then UNLV would be the entity that would actually put my name in the NCAA transfer portal. The court said, we can't keep, you have to put his name in the transfer portal, but he can't go play football anywhere. He can't enroll anywhere. And I believe they did actually put his name in the transfer portal today. Because even though the deadline had passed, there's all these proceedings going on. So I think that there was an exception of some sort that allowed Duke to put his name in the transfer portal late. Therefore, where are we now? What is Duke's what's the end game here? And what is whatever the result of this going to have as an impact as to the rest of college sports? Duke is, in my opinion, they basically know that because of how messy all of this is just my opinion about the position that Duke's in. I think Duke knows that there is not a good chance of Darian Mensah actually returning to Duke to play football for the Blue Devils. Instead, Duke is trying to get Miami to basically buy out Mensah. Duke is trying to get Miami to pay Duke $4 million. And not just that. And in my view, Duke wants that $4 million to be subtracted from the cap, which is it's around $20 million. Each school technically is not allowed to. Now I think they're breaking this cap under the table because everybody's rotten cheaters in college sports. But Miami's basically saying, hey, Duke should also lose out on $4 million of their cap. And then they'd have to pay Darian Mensah whatever he was promised. So basically, Duke is trying to, in my view, Duke is trying to torpedo Miami and saying, hey, you're interfering with our player and we're going to make you pay because we have a contract with that player. Now, what are Darian Mensah's defenses? Essentially, there is no regulatory body that has any real control in the NCAA Division I FBS football. The only authority that people are really pointing to are judges, like the one who granted this preliminary injunction in favor of Duke. There is no governing body. The NCAA really doesn't have any power because if the NCAA tries to challenge or enforce anything, it gets taken to court and the NCAA loses. That's the way it's been for the last 7 or 8 years. And so Darian Mensah and his agents are saying, there's no body controlling all of this, and it's free trade. People should have the right to get the most out of their NIL. And really, people should have the right to make the most money that they can and be in the best position that they can while they're student athletes. And they're saying, you're restricting our clients' ability to do that. And frankly, the enforcement of these contracts really isn't common, and it's just not good precedent. Now, Duke On paper, Duke has all the leverage here. They just do. And many schools, before Washington and before Duke right now, have just put up their hands and said, whatever, good riddance, and not been willing to try and enforce these contracts legally. But Duke, just like Washington before them, are saying no. We do not want a college system where players are 1-year rentals. If we want to be able to, if we sign an agreement that a player is a 2-year player, they're going to be a 2-year player. And this opens up a huge can of worms, a massive can of worms. Frankly, one of the biggest issues facing college sports right now, and you're seeing this especially on the NCAA basketball side, is, how many years can a player play? How many years are you allowed to be a college athlete making money? And the thing is, for most of these players, for the majority of them, they're not going to go on and make money professionally. Their money-making opportunity for playing sports is while they're a college athlete. Therefore, how long should they be allowed to do that? Now, previously in the past, the NCAA set rules about eligibility. Players had 4 years and then 1 redshirt year. But players have taken, the NCAA to court and gotten extra 6th, 7th, 8th years of eligibility. And the NCAA has really had no power to stop it because courts have issued injunctions against the against the NCAA. And, how many years are players able to play? That's a big issue. Can schools enforce these enforce these contracts? That's a big issue. Can players be just treated as employees of the school? And if players can be employees of the school, how does eligibility work? Why is it fair that I, as an employee, should have a time limit for the amount of time that I can be an employee? Shouldn't my ability to simply be a good football player allow me to be an employee for until I'm no longer valuable to the university? Think about it in terms of, basically, if we're going to treat these people like professional athletes, why do we have eligibility, 4 or 5 years of eligibility as a barrier to these guys being able to make money when this is their only avenue to actually make money? These are massive questions. And enforcement of contracts is huge. And, college sports needs to make a decision. Do they want to be professional sports, or do they want to be, and basically they already have made that decision. College sports are professional sports now. But if college sports is to go on, there has to be a way to regulate, to enforce agreements. It can't all be at the hands and the whims of a judge. We can't, individual judges have all the power in the world. You want to find yourself somebody on a power trip. A district court judge is the strongest. They have power to make almost anybody do anything. It's pretty remarkable. I'm being a little simplistic in that interpretation, but basically, we need to make it and so that we can enforce rules on players and schools. And really, the only way to do that is some form of collective bargaining. Part of the reason why the NBA can sign players up for contracts and players can't just leave teams whenever they want is because the players, while yes, they have guaranteed compensation, they also have rules placed on them because of that guaranteed compensation. Now, what are the difficulties and this is opening up a huge can of worms beyond the scope of this video. I could make a video. In fact, I probably should make a video on the difficulties of having collective bargaining. Basically, that means unionization of players, of college student athletes. Again, eligibility is a huge issue. How many years are you allowed to be a part of this union? Why should it only be 5 years? Why can't it be 6 or 7 years? Players in the past have gotten 6 or 7 years because of medical red shirts, so why should it only be 5 years now? Also, who's a part of this union? There in the NBA, you have things like minimum contracts. If you've been in the NBA for a certain period of time and you sign a contract with a team, there is a minimum amount that team must pay you. Say we unionize college sports and student athletes. Will there be a minimum contract? If I'm a part of the union and I'm just as, if I'm a student athlete at Tulane and I'm a part of the same union that players at Florida are, then shouldn't I get a minimum level of compensation? Who's going to pay that compensation? It's really difficult. It's really difficult. And that's why people have brought up the Super League, because that would help. But creating the Super League is its own huge pot of issues, because if you're one of the teams that's not wanted in the Super League, you're still an FBS member. You still have legal rights over the teams that would go and try and create a Super League. And, if I was a team that was going to be left out of a Super League, what would I accept as compensation? I have legal rights as an FBS member. Believe it or not, we are all competing for the same national championship. And so why would I allow schools that I'm contractually a part of, in the same entity of the FBS, why would I allow those schools to abandon me and devalue, if 40 or 30 or 40 schools go off and form their own league, they're basically demoting the other 80 schools in college sports. And those 80 schools don't want to be demoted, most of them. The point I'm trying to bring up, I'm throwing a lot out here right now, but the point I'm trying to bring up is this Duke Darian Mensah situation is indicative and going to be kind of a Rorschach test of the way that enforcement of contracts, the way that NIL payments, the way, a pay for play, this is all part of an initial step towards something else, because the current system is broken. The fact that Darian Mensah signed a contract with Duke that said he was going to play there for 2 years, and then at the end of 1 year said, actually, I'm out of here. That can't be the way that college sports works. If you sign a 2-year contract, you should be bound to that 2-year contract deal. And I think the judge might see it that way. The arbitrator might see it that way. But we need to get to a system where teams can put contractual obligations on players for more than a year, and that players have to fulfill those. And where schools also are bound by contractual obligations that benefit players. I don't know the solution right now. I really don't. If your solution is unionization of student athletes, I can make a whole video on why that's going to be really, really, really difficult. If your solution is a super league where 40 teams form a super league, guess what? The other 80 teams are going to have a say about that. I'm sorry, we're all a part of the FBS. I don't know that a super league is going to happen. I don't know. People like to throw it out there. I know that it's been talked about for years. I think that there are serious roadblocks to that. And it's not coming in 5 years. It's going to take 10, 15, 20. We could see a 30-year, essentially wild west of college sports, where there are no rules, where everybody's throwing money around like crazy, where players are not, we could see maybe not 30 years, but definitely 10 to 15 years of that before something finally concrete happens. These are crazy times we live in. And frankly, as a group of 5, a group of 6, I guess, football fan, and just as a college sports fan in general, I commend Duke for what they're doing. I think they're taking the right approach. I think it's important that we hold these players to contracts. And I think the schools should have to be held to those contracts too. If the schools suddenly didn't want to pay Darian Mensah $4 million next year, they shouldn't be able to renege on the contract that they sign with players either. Fascinating times. And the result of this lawsuit, what ends up happening with Duke and Darian Mensah, is going to affect your school. It is. So guys, let me know your thoughts. This is kind of a general informational video. Maybe I'll make a video talking about, specifically why unionization is going to be really tough. Maybe I'll make a video about this, about the Super League and why that will be very difficult. Again, I am an attorney, but, barred in the state of Nevada. But none of this is legal advice, especially if you're like a player watching, no, don't take any of this as legal advice. Get your own attorney. But I appreciate you guys checking out the show today. I hope you will like this video and subscribe to the channel, and have an awesome rest of your week. Let's run.